Good morning. How are we feeling today? I am excited to be here. You know why? Because for once in the 20-some months that I've been here, I'm allowed to pump my own gas. Right? I'm capable, yes. No, for those of you who are watching online, welcome. In Oregon, we're allowed to pump our own gas now. I don't know where you fit on it. I feel like it shouldn't be that controversial either way. But if it is, I'm sorry. I'm enjoying that part. Not the price of gas, just the ability to pump the gas. That's the thing, right? That's different. It's different. We are excited that you're here today. We are starting a brand new series called Anti-Hero. I know this, that we all face challenges. We all have things in our life. Sometimes we all want to be the hero of our own story, but sometimes we do things that are not great things, but God works all things together for the good of those who love him. All right? So sometimes God uses us in spite of us, in other words, right? So we're going to be talking about this, and we're going to be, it's going to be a great series over the next few weeks, but I want to share something with you. My son Jordan, some of you have heard me talk about this. Him and I, he's 7, we love to wrestle. Jordan's belief right now is that I am the world's strongest man. I have not yet showed him the old ESPN World's Strongest Men competitions yet, because he doesn't need to be filled with that, idea. And I think that, by looking at me and just, I think that you might agree, right? I think that my physique is amazing, is what I'm trying to say. No. I'm not the world's strongest man, but I still have that title in my house right now. I think that's what I'm clinging on to, for now. For now. But here's another thing. There are no perfectly strong people. There are only people who have strengths in certain areas of their lives. There's nobody that's absolutely strong in every single area of their lives. We all have challenges. Some have emotional toughness. Some have impressive physiques like your boy here. And some have mental toughness and mental strength, right? And mental fortitude, right? And nobody has this. Even Jesus couldn't cut it as a carpenter, right? He got kicked out of his dad's apprentice program. I don't know if that's true. I'm not. I'm just kidding. I have no idea. There's always an exception to the rule, right? And if there's any exception to this rule, Jesus is the one, right? Jesus was strong. There's always that exception. However, I do believe it is possible for us to live in strength and in power. In fact, Paul said this in 2 Corinthians. He said that he's quoting Jesus saying, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weaknesses," in your weakness. My power is made perfect in you. There is an ability that we can live in power and strength through Jesus, through what he got. In other words, even when we feel weak and helpless, there's hope. Even when we feel weak and helpless, there's hope. So what's really the purpose of his power for our lives, and how do we tap into that powerful reality? That's what we're going to be talking about today and throughout this series. Today's message is titled, "The Paradox of Power." My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. It is the paradox of power. And in this series, we're going to study the life of a man that for many people, when we think of somebody who was impressively strong, who was really strong, they are immediately reminded of him, especially in a biblical context. And we're going to look at the life of a man named Samson. His story is found in Judges chapter 13 through 16. His whole story is encompassed in these 4 chapters, which obviously just hits some highlight points of his life, points that we are supposed to know about him, but doesn't encompass his entire life. But we find out a lot about Samson in these 4 chapters. A lot about him. We find out in Judges chapter 13 is really kind of how he was born. In the beginning of Judges 13, it says that once again, the Israelites had done evil in the sight of the Lord and were under the oppression of the Philistines and has been at this point for 40 years. I always highlight and underline that once again because I realize I mess up again and again and again and again in my life. And so I can't necessarily criticize the Israelites, but I can appreciate the fact that, man, this happened again. It happened again. It happened again. And here we are in Judges 13 again. They did what was evil in the Lord's sight. Now, Samson's parents were living in the Philistines' backyard. It was not a great time to be an Israelite. It simply wasn't. You were under oppression for the Philistines. It had been 40 years. There seems to be no hope. And an angel comes and pronounces to Samson's mom that she's going to have a baby. Now, they couldn't have a baby. And we've seen this story kind of play out a couple different times throughout Scripture. But an angel comes and pronounces Samson's birth to the mom, who goes and tells her husband. And the angel commissioned them to raise him under a specific guidelines called a Nazirite vow. Now, it's a calling that would make him different than the people around him. It would set him apart. A Nazirite vow is something that a lot of people did around that time, but they would typically do it about a month at a time and kind of give up a little bit. It's kind of like Lent or going to the gym in January, right? It's kind of how most people treated that. For a month at a time, they wouldn't cut their hair, they wouldn't drink from the fruit of the vine, they wouldn't drink any kind of alcohol, or they wouldn't touch anything unclean. And what Samson's parents, what the angel commissioned them to do, was to raise him this way for his entire life. Instead of 1 month, he would do this for his entire life. This is what they were committing to. This is what he was supposed to commit to. This was the vow. And Samson grew up. And as he grew up, that commitment that his parents made for him was that he would follow this vow for the rest of his life. And then in return, God would give him strength, and that he would begin the deliverance of his people, Israel. It's another passage in Judges chapter 13 that I always circle and underline, because sometimes we quickly glance over that. In fact, his parents don't ever say it again. And it goes into, he will be the deliverance. He will deliver. He will do this. And what actually the angel said is that he will begin the deliverance of Israel. Oftentimes, we skip over maybe that one little filler word that changes the entire thing. That God's really saying, hey, I'm going to start this in your life. This is going to start a pattern or start something new in your life. And we're like, this is it. Well, no, this is just the beginning. This is just the beginning. So Samson was a man of great physical strength, but we're going to find out that he wasn't perfect. And sometimes it was like he wasn't even trying to be perfect. He wasn't even trying to be perfect. He was an incredibly strong man with a dangerously weak will. Incredibly strong, dangerously weak will. He had his own flaws, his own setbacks. I have my own flaws, my own setbacks. You probably are perfect. But I can relate with Samson. Most of his life was a train wreck. He had the physical strength, but there were several unhealthy attitudes, some unhealthy mindsets, some unhealthy internal struggles that just dominated his life and greatly impacted the trajectory of his story. He was an anti-hero. He kind of got in his own way, but God used him mightily, but it wasn't because he was just like doing all these incredible things. It was this weird paradox of power that we see at play. And as much as Samson's life seems unrelatable to us, I believe that these same issues, these same unhealthy patterns, mindsets, attitudes, internal struggles are things that create huge messes in our lives. So Samson is born, and it's Judges 13 is all about the birth of Samson, and he grows up, and we kind of pick up the story here in Judges chapter 14. It says this in verse 1. One day, Samson was in Timnah, when he was there, one of the Philistine women caught his eye. That is Bible talk for, he saw something he liked, right? He was going after it. Caught his eye. When he returned home, he told his father and mother, a young Philistine woman in Timnah caught my eye. I want to marry her. Get her for me. Get her for me. And his father and mother objected. Isn't there even one woman in our tribe among the Israelites that you could marry? It seems like a parent's conversation, right? Like I feel like I've heard this. Why must you go to the pagan Philistines to find a wife? But Samson told his father, get her for me. She looks good to me. Yes, she did. I love this story is awesome. The first unhealthy attitude that we see pop up in Samson's life is lust. And then the internal thought that we always have when we are this unhealthy attitude kind of plays out in our life is I want it. I want it. I want it. This is something that dominated Samson's life. We're going to see this at play throughout this entire series, throughout this entire story, his story. He seemed to have appetites that were never satisfied. We do too. We do too. Our appetites are never fully and finally satisfied. We always crave more. We learn words like mine, I want that, give me at a very, very early age. Right? Very early in life. Whether it's people, possessions, power, the chasing after more can be a terrible driving force in our lives. It's something that dominates a lot of our lives. So, some backstory is that Samson's family didn't want him to marry this Philistine woman, right? Didn't want him to marry the family. Can't you find somebody else? Isn't there somebody here that you could marry? Now, mixed marriages at the time of the Israelites was forbidden. The law said it wasn't a good thing to do. It stipulated that. But it was more about spiritual direction than about race. It was more about, we don't want you to kind of, to be unequally yoked in a way of ungodly pagan cultures than it was about, we're worried about this Philistine because she's a Philistine. It's why today, as believers, we're encouraged to make sure that the people we are marrying believe like us. It's hard to follow Jesus in a marriage by yourself. It's hard. So while his parents are, it's a common question, it's a good question, it wasn't sometimes the way that we see it. Now, so Samson goes down to Timnah, right? He sees this girl. She catches his eye. He can't stop thinking about her. He wants her, right? I want to marry her, get her for me. It feels like there was going to be a TV series made about this whole, get engaged and married and all that kind of stuff, like right now kind of thing. Fiance in 90 days type of situation. Get her for me. In fact, when you look at this phrase, though, in the original Hebrew, it's really uncomfortable. Because it's not this phrase of, hey, I really like her. Can you make this happen? Can you arrange this somehow? I mean, that's the girl. I got my eye on her. I want to marry. No, in the original Hebrew, it was seize her, grab her, get her for me. Not cool. Not cool, Samson. Right? He's saying, make it happen, Dad. His lust, his desire for having this woman was on another level. He was like, I need to have this. I want it. It's mine. Give it to me. I need it. Verse 5 says, it talks about that Samson took his parents back down to Timnah. And I would imagine to point the girl out to them. Like, she's the one. She's the one I want you to kidnap. Get her for me. Now, before we crack down on Samson for his miscommunicated persistence in pursuit of this woman, kind of lusting after the things that he wants in his life, I think we have to acknowledge that there are some things that possibly we lust after too, right? Even beyond the sexual, comes into the forms of things like cars and homes and clothes and careers. It comes in the form of positions and power and all sorts of things that we are driven to have. We have to have it. I want it. Get it for me. The question is it bad to have nice things? No, it's not bad to have nice things. In and of itself, it's not bad to have nice things. However, lusting after things happens when we are so driven by something, that's all we can ever think about. It is unchecked obsession, right? It's unchecked obsession. It happens when our happiness is dependent on us having that thing, and we will do whatever it takes to get that thing because we want it that badly. I want it. I want it. We go on the story in verse 5. It says, Samson and his parents go down to Timnah, because it said, a young lion suddenly attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. Now, I think in this story we have to point out that Samson was probably a better hiker than his parents. And he was further on ahead of his parents. I get this because when I hike with my family, my dad is way out in front of me. Like, we're not, I'm like, I'll see you at the top, I guess, dude. So they're going together, but they're not together. So a young lion suddenly attacked Samson near the vineyards of Timnah. At that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him, and he ripped the lion's jaws apart with his bare hands. And get this, he did it as easily as if it were a young goat, right? Like, I don't know how hard it is to tear a young goat in half, but apparently it was as easy as that. He didn't tell his father and mother about it. And then it says, when Samson arrived at Timnah, he talked with the woman. And you know what? He was very pleased with her, it says. He was very pleased with her. I mean, this guy, obviously, he's incredibly strong. He tears the lion just apart. Just, And here's a guy who just moments earlier was making demands of his parents to go get this woman for him. I need to have it. I want to have it. And one thing that Samson's story shows us is that if we are now not aware of our weaknesses, we can often use our strengths to overcompensate our weaknesses and even overcome them. And in some cases, that's okay, right? Our strengths are our strengths for a reason, right? Our weaknesses are our weaknesses for a reason. In some cases, that's okay. But in other cases, it can be really destructive. It can be really destructive. Sometimes, because God is good, he will even empower us by his Spirit like he did for Samson. Then we will be able to have victories or defeat lions. And if we aren't careful, though, we will confuse our strength with God's approval. It happened, therefore God must approve of it. I could do it, therefore it's blessed by God. And I've learned that sometimes God moves in spite of us. When the lion showed up, the Spirit of God moved in power on Samson's life, and not because of who Samson was, but because of what God had promised him. So the lion is dead, ripped apart. Samson survives. He leaves the carcass right there by the side of the road because, he wanted people to see it. I don't know. He goes down the road to capture the heart of this Philistine woman and maybe just more to get her, How can I make this happen? And he's making some wedding plans. He never tells his parents about it. I don't know about you. When I omitted things from my parents, it never went good for me. Never. I have stories, too. Oh, yeah. Really, really, really. Yeah, I'm not going to share those. No, we don't need to do that. We don't. Ask me sometime. He doesn't tell his parents about it. So in verse 8, it says, later, he came back. He returned to Timnah for the wedding. So, things happen, right? They're getting married. And he turned off the path to look at the carcass of the lion. And he found that a swarm of bees had made some honey in the carcass. He scooped some of the honey into his hands and ate it along the way. He also gave some to his father and mother, and they ate it. But he didn't tell them that he had taken the honey from the carcass of the lion. The second unhealthy attitude that shows up in Samson's life, and probably not his alone, is entitlement. Entitlement. The thought is, I deserve it. Not only do I want it, but I deserve it. That's the internal thought. Now, see, here's what I know. Wedding plans take time, right? You got to book the venue. You got to buy the dress. You got to send out the invitations. You got to taste all the cakes, right? They take some time. Now, Samson is on his way back down to Timnah. It's been some time. He's on his way. He's got a tuxedo in his travel bag. He's ready to go. It's wedding time. And he says, you know what? I got to go look at this victory I had. I remember this lion. It's probably still there. I'm going to go check it out. He goes and checks out the lion. And, of course, he sees the carcass of the lion, and there's this honeycomb in it. And the bees that have made that honeycomb, and he scoops out honey, which I just feel like, man, that's just on another level in of itself. I just feel like there's a beehive there. I'm not just going, yeah, that seems good. And he gets it, and he eats it. He gives some to his parents. They eat it. It's not any big deal, right? It's just honey. It's kind of gross because you're getting it out of a dead lion, right? But he's got a sweet tooth, and, when you got a sweet tooth, you need something sweet. So he does it. except that touching this lion broke his Nazirite vow. He was not supposed to touch anything that was unclean, which is why he never told his parents where he got the honey from. Because you can imagine that conversation. Why did he do it? Why did he hide it from his parents? Well, I think it's because he felt entitled to that honey. The honey was there because he killed the lion. If the lion hadn't been there, the honey wouldn't be there. So the honey was his, even though he was breaking his commitment and promise to the Lord. Why take the time to kind of talk about this little blip, this little moment in Samson's life, in the timeline of his life? Because I think this attitude actually pervades our lives as well. This attitude of entitlement. We are just as guilty at times of feeling entitled like Samson did. In fact, spiritual entitlement happens when we know what God has said, but we do something different anyways. We choose to think that we are the exception to the rule. It happens when we know what God said, but we choose to be the exception to the rule. I know what God says about tithing, but you know what? I'm going to do this. I know what God says about marriage, but you know what? I think this is okay. I'm going to justify this. I know what God says about lying, but you know what? This lie is a good lie. I know what God says about honoring my parents, but you know what? They're cruel sometimes, so I think God will understand. I'm not saying anything this morning to try to beat us up or to kind of make you feel condemned, because here's what I know. Even in your moment of your greatest moments of failure, even in the greatest moments of failure, God loves you. God cares for you. His grace is for you. It's there. Even in our biggest moments of failure. But what you also have to know is that there's nothing that you or I could do to ever become exempt from obedience and doing what God has called us to do. There's nothing. And here's what's wrong with entitlement. This is big. You can't bless anyone who is entitled. You can't bless anyone who's entitled because they already think that they deserve what they're getting. So God's like, I can't bless you. You're feeling entitled, but you already think you deserve what you, and I know you don't deserve it. I can't bless you. So, however, when we are obedient to Him, God brings blessings in our lives. He brings breath. When we are obedient in giving, He blesses us. He gives back to us. When we are obedient in our marriage, He blesses our marriage. When we are obedient in telling the truth, God blesses us and brings us peace, even when the truth is sometimes difficult. And when we are obedient to our parents, God blesses us. In fact, He promises us long life. I think that's just because, if you don't honor your parents, you get some whoopings. That's all. God blesses us. An attitude, a spirit of entitlement will rob you of your joy. But when you are obedient to God, God will bless you and bring joy to your life. Entitlement is an issue that we all face. We all face this. So he doesn't tell his parents about where he gets the honey from. So in verse 10, it says, as his father was making final arrangements for the marriage, Samson threw a party at Timnah, as was custom for the elite young men. I don't know why. I don't know this because, I was never in the elite young men category, but apparently it's a thing. No. His dad's making some preparations. The third unhealthy mindset trap that Samson deals with is pride. And I believe sometimes you and I might fall into that trap as well. And the thought with pride is not only I want it, I deserve it, it's I can handle it. I can do it. I got this. Samson's dad is going to make final preparations, final arrangements for the wedding, whatever that meant. I'm sure they had to do some sort of negotiations with the bride's dad. And Samson decides to throw a party. And the Hebrew word here is mishta. And it's not just any party. It is a rager. It is a drinking party. It is known as a drinking party, right? Samson's intention was to throw a bender and to get wasted. Now, like Scripture said, this was customary for the young elite men to do, right? Yes, but That's one of the greatest problems with this entire story, because Samson, again, he was supposed to be set apart. His life was supposed to be set apart. His vow, his Nazirite vow, included abstaining from wine and from anything that grew on the vine. So once again, here in the first 10 verses of this, we see him break his Nazirite vow twice, almost seeming like he's not even trying to keep it. Samson's life was supposed to be set apart. It was supposed to not look anything like the lives of the other men and women of his day, because he was set apart by God. And in the same way, followers of Jesus are supposed to be different. Right? We're not supposed to look like the lives of the people of the world. And I'm not going to talk a little bit about convictions today, or what I think believers should or shouldn't partake in or do, because the truth is that the most important thing is, if we are drawing closer and closer to Jesus every day and we're trying to become holy as he is holy, he will help us with those things. His Spirit will convict us where conviction is needed. But Samson's life wasn't supposed to look anything like that. He will help us with those things. God will. The point is, we're supposed to be different. Paul says it this way in Ephesians. He's just instructing the Ephesian church and us as well. He says, put off your old self. Put off your old self. He says, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and then be renewed in the spirit of your mind. And by being renewed in the spirit of your mind, you're putting off your old self, you're putting on your new self, created after the likeness of God in all righteousness and holiness. Or another time, Paul reminded Titus, he said, once we too were foolish and disobedient. Once we too were foolish and disobedient. We were misled and became slaves to many lusts and pleasures. Our lives were full of envy and evil. But when the grace of God appeared, when the goodness of God appeared, he saved us. He transformed us. He renewed us. Titus, you're supposed to look different. Follower of Jesus, you're supposed to live differently. You're supposed to be set apart. These old things have to be old things and in the past, and in its place are new things, new growth that we are experiencing. It is transformation. However, for Samson, his life is actually going backward a little bit. He's drifting from the plan that God had for him. He's drifting. In his pride, through his actions, Samson is telling God, you know what? I got this. I'm strong. I can do this on my own. I can handle it. I'm calling the shots. He's trying to do things in his own strength, which was incredible. But here's where the story relates to us. At the end of the day, you get to decide who leads. Whether it's you or it's God. You get to decide. God did not force the decision on Samson, nor does he force the decision on you or on me. We get to decide who leads. Is it us or is it him? The story proves that it doesn't matter what commitments you make for your kids. It doesn't matter what commitments you make for your kids. And all of these commitments could be really, really good. You could have your kids dedicated. You could have them in church. You could pray for them. You could read the Bible with them. You could do everything you can to pattern a walk with Jesus for them. And that stuff absolutely matters. All that stuff is important. It will greatly influence them and teach them and help them and guide them. But in the end, everyone has to own their own faith and walk with Jesus. Everyone has to. The more Samson tried to rely upon his own strength and his own abilities, the more he seems to kind of decline and diminish his life. And we're going to fast forward to the end of the story. I'm not going to give any spoilers to the story. You got to come the next couple weeks to get all that. But in Judges chapter 16, verse 31, there's this one verse that says that Samson led the Israelites for 20 years. In the mix of all this chaotic mess of his life, he led the Israelites for 20 years. There was something that he was an influence, even with all that stuff. What I can't help but think is that even though he struggled with lust, and guess what? It's going to get worse. Even though he struggled and he battled entitlement, it's going to get worse too. And even though he battled and struggled with pride, yeah, it gets worse. While all that is going on, some behind the scenes and a lot of it out in the open for everyone to see, for 20 years, he still had influence, giftings, and great strength. This is why these 4 chapters that we're going to look at and the struggles that he went through, and we're kind of going, there's this paradox of power because you kind of see like Samson went through all this stuff. I really don't get why he is a hero, but I kind of get it, but I don't really get it. But then in Hebrews chapter 11, the author says that he is one of the heroes of the faith. I think it's because of Judges 16:31, that for 20 years, God used him to lead the Israelites, but also through some of the things that he messed up in, God showed up in. This anti-hero almost, where he was doing some things not quite right, wrong things, but God redeemed them for the right reasons. The point is this: there are moments in your life, maybe yours, in his life, and in my life, and maybe yours too, when I'm not doing well, but on the outside I look like everything's okay. That I'm in control. It's possible for things like lust and entitlement and pride to be eating away at us on the inside while we look fine on the outside. Not saying we have to be perfect, but we can't neglect what's happening on the inside. It's unseen, but it's important. And one of the ways that we can bring healing and wholeness to our hearts is by taking on some different attitudes, mindsets, making some shifts. Instead of lusting after people, possessions, power, I want it kind of thoughts. We can have the attitude of, God, I want more of you. Instead of having the attitude of entitlement, saying, I deserve it, we can say, I didn't get what I deserved. God showed me mercy. Because of my sin, I deserved far worse than this. We can show humility. Instead of having pride and saying, I got this, I can handle this, we can choose to surrender and say, Lord, I can't handle anything without you. Or, God, I need you. God, I need you. The paradox of power is the realization that God's strength is made perfect in our weakness. And we can't have his power when we are trying to do it in our own strength. But when we submit to him, when we surrender to him, he releases his strength and his power for our lives. It comes as a result of choosing to be set apart for him. And here's the cool thing. When we do that, when we submit our lives, our hearts to him and say, God, I need you. I want more of you. I deserve far worse, but I'm so thankful that you gave me grace. When we do that, we understand what God said through Zechariah, that it's not by might, not by power, but by his Spirit. Right? You're not perfectly strong. I'm not either. But God still loves you, still cares for you, still has grace for you. The challenge is, man, let's take a little look and see how can we maybe tweak from I want, I deserve, I can handle, to God, I need you. I need you. Let me pray for you this morning. Father, thank you for your persistence in our lives. That you are always there in the midst of us once again messing up. God, I know in my life I have had a lot of difficulties and challenges. I've messed up a lot. God, thank you for giving me the second, third, and 487th chance. I know I'm not alone. You do that for each and every one of us. Because you so loved each person here, each person watching you, the whole world. That you have a plan in motion to redeem us so that we can have a relationship with you. And all it takes for us is to choose who leads. Today you might be praying here, and as we're still praying, you might be saying, you know what, today is the day I want to choose. I'm going to let him lead my life. I'm going to let God lead. Maybe it's for the first time. Maybe it's once again. But if that's you today, I just want you in your own way to pray, God, I want you to lead. I'm saying yes to you. I need you. I need more of you. I want to follow you. And God, I pray for those of us who are battling maybe these similar mindsets, similar attitudes as we've seen from Samson. You help us to replace those internal thoughts of I want it, I deserve it, I can handle it. God, I want more of you. God, thank you for your mercy and grace. And God, I need you. Thank you for your work in my life and what you've given to me. Thank you that your power is made perfect in my weakness, that I don't have to be perfect, but as long as I'm striving to be closer and closer to you every day and holy as you are holy, that you are going to do amazing things in my life and you're going to bless things because I am relying on you. We thank you. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.